Great being with you, Toby. Thank you. Yeah, yeah. Ah, it's always such a it's a tough question. I spread myself thin, I think. So how do I really define myself and what's interesting about me? I work with children and teachers, and I consult those folks, families, and schools about kids who either fall through the cracks or have difficulty in schools, and for whom the system either doesn't do them justice, which happens sometimes, or can be tricky. So I'll help parents and families go through the special education system of schools. And I also work directly in school systems. So I'm always being a little careful about how I'm addressing an audience I'm talking to, and what bent I have during that conversation. I'm going to say probably most of what I say today, I'll just put a blanket thing out that it won't be representative of any institutions I work for. So I work as a behavior specialist for students in elementary through high school as well. And then I have a foot in the door of the addiction field as well. I wrote a book, I've written columns for various publications about addiction, and I've studied it. And from a journalistic perspective, I've studied it from a theoretical perspective, an academic perspective. And I wrote a book with one of the leaders in the addiction field. He's written bestsellers in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. He's a psychologist named Stanton Peele. And he and I recently wrote a book called Outgrowing Addiction with Common Sense Instead of Disease Therapy, which bucks against the disease model of addiction, which has become prominent. What else do I do? I host a podcast called the Social Exchange Podcast, where um, you know I dare to reach out to people who are at what I would call the forefront of the topics I'm interested in, and invite them to have conversations with me on the podcast, which I used to do as just like I thought it'd be cool to talk to these people just for my own sake, and it stemmed from a selfish, thought process like that. Now it's more people happen to start listening to it. I really don't know how that happened. I didn't do anything heroic or really try to get an audience, but from my perspective, at least, I know that there are people with hundreds of thousands, millions of viewers and listeners to their content or whatever. But I started this podcast, The Social Exchange, with an idea that if anyone was going to listen, then it would be a handful of people, family, friends, and the odd person who stumbles upon it. And it turned into thousands, and it turned into sometimes tens of thousands of people listening to these conversations. And I felt like I should probably do something to tighten up, the content, the questions, prepare a little bit more, be thoughtful, and speak to the listeners rather than just speak on my own behalf. So now that's something that I spent a lot of time and energy on. I was reluctant for a while to say that podcasting was like a main gig because it sounds a little silly. Maybe I don't know. I thought it sounded a little silly. It can be. It's almost like I'm playing. It's like a game or something like that, and I'm saying that it's part of my essence of who I am. But to be honest, it is, and I am playing, and that's how I learn. That's how people learn, and so enough people have become interested in it that I'm proud to say that podcasting is a crucial part of how I learn right now. All of the things that I learn, whether it's about addiction or kids in schools or just how I make sense of uh, social goings on. And it actually is a source of learning for thousands of people who tune in regularly to every show that I publish. So between among all of those things, this is more so when we were able to go to crowded places with no problem. I'm a musician, and I not so much a studio recording musician. Not sure why, but if you think about like stand-up comics who are very busy but don't do a lot of like comedy specials, I sort of see myself that way, but as a musician. I'm not sure. I don't have anything against recording in the studio. I just don't make time for it, and I'm always well, before we were in lockdowns, I was always playing a show. If someone threw me a gig somewhere, even if I had to travel for it, I'd go play with different bands. And so I think that was a really long answer to your question of how I define myself, but you asked for it. Yeah, that's true. Tell me. Mhm. Mhm. Such a good point. Very well said. So I'm happy to be participating in something like that. That's right up my alley. Yeah, representative, but yeah, almost everything. Like, issue by issue, what we think an end result should be, insofar as we have an idea about the end result. Yeah, the person you're talking about and I disagree on nearly everything. But it's funny how meaningless that is, actually. That point is kind of moot if you think about how much we agree on the process of getting to truth. Then you start to act as though you kind of agree on everything. You just may have gone slightly different paths or have slightly different prioritizations along the way. Mhm. Yeah. Mm. It seems that way. It seems if you pigeonhole each of us into our respective political and ideological boxes, we shouldn't agree on almost anything. Mhm. No, yeah, no, I don't think so. Not about me anyway. Once you said rich, you lost me. Yeah, isn't that funny? You know, I interviewed Charles Murray one time, and I would imagine people watching your show would probably know who he is just because of the conversations you might get into about uh, what's controversial or not. But anyway, I started that interview with, so I'm a progressive liberal from Burlington, Vermont. And his response is, "Oh wow, I'm shocked that you're from Burlington, Vermont, and are a progressive liberal." So we do. My reputation does precede me. Yeah, sure. A few things I think led to the book project. One was that I had an addiction of my own, and I can get to maybe talking about my definition of what that means in a little bit. But suffice it to say, I had a heroin monkey on my back. I was deeply involved in using heroin as a way to get some gratification that I felt I was missing in other regions of my life, and that had destructive consequences. And so you would, by any one's definition, you'd say I was a heroin addict, and that when it comes to, if you ask someone when I was in the throes of my worst sort of cyclical behavior around heroin, if you asked a professional, well, what should I do to help him? There's a series of answers you might get, and none of them would have worked for me. Between going to a rehabilitation place or leaving home or attending 12-step meetings. And on the other hand, if you aren't such a, addiction is an ailment kind of a thinker, uh, well, let's show him tough love. He needs to figure his own shit out, or things like that. That probably wouldn't have. If you're someone trying to help me, I would say that I probably wouldn't respond well to that either. What did happen was that I kicked the problem on my own. I say on my own, but I mean it happened with sets of resources and skills and trying to realign my values every time I did something to oppose them and think, why am I doing this? Am I a bad person? Am I a good person? Thinking about my motivation. I did have work. I did have relationships, and so eventually, just that whole style of behavior, it just could not jibe with who what I had going for me, what was possible to lose. And so I decided on my own to stop it. And I kind of remember a moment when I thought, you know what, I'm not doing it anymore. And so I just stopped using illicit drugs. And I would say even if I decided I wanted to use illicit drugs sometimes in a way that would enhance my life only, then I still wouldn't be addicted. But I happen to have stopped altogether. So anyway, I thought that it was just a nice secret that I was able to keep about myself. From luckily, I had a near death experience on when I was using heroin, which I came to find out is nearly never heroin. I mean, it's something that you could relate to heroin, or maybe there's heroin in what you're buying on the streets. But what I was using likely was a mix of fentanyl, heroin, and other intoxicants that who knows where they came from or what they were. And I was found, I won't go into too much detail about this, but I was found in my home, unresponsive, hardly breathing, blue, um, and driven to the hospital where I was helped back to, resuscitated and helped back to breathing on my own again. And So that was an experience that you'd think, okay, well, I want to choose life. Even that experience, I had to really take a deep thought about, all right, what the hell am I doing here? But I was able to, with some cognitive dissonance in my back pocket, was able to think about, well, that was an anomaly. I could be more careful. Heroin is important. Drugs are important to me. It is important for me to be able to alter my consciousness. So I'm not going to totally stop. So even then, you think, oh, the near-death experience was your savior. Actually, no, it was more of like the other ingredients in life. So I outgrew my addiction, basically, is what I'm saying. And uh, and that was just something I kept to myself or to my family and didn't really talk too much about because it's embarrassing. At the same time, I used to hold a career and then maintain and thrive in the future in a career when I stopped working with children. And I helped kids uh, who had difficulty in school, kids who had the most challenging behavior, either for themselves or for challenging for other people, usually is how I roped into it. And I started that by working like a YMCA program as a after school kind of guy, then working in the school system, and then I was flagged is a stupid word, but I was noticed as somebody who um, has a special talent with working with the population of kids who no one really wants to work with or really difficult to work with. Then I went to got some credentials in that area, and now that's what I do. I work with kids in schools and outside of schools, consulting about how they're misunderstood, how sometimes they're getting in their own way, what are some best practices and the most thoughtful ways to help them develop on their own. And so, doing that, I started a podcast which was called the Young Justice Podcast. It was a little plant, like I don't know. So like I thought people were being treated unjustly as in their youth or something like that. It was stupid. But I started getting brave and cold calling these people who are professionals who I thought were just amazing. And I put a call out to like Michael Shermer, put a call out to Carol Tavris, who wrote Mistakes Were Made, but Not by Me, put a call out to this guy named Dr. Stanton Peele, who I wound up writing the book with. And I went 3 for 3. All those people answered and said, sure, that'd be great. Love to be on your show. I'm like, what's going on here? And so I think having those big names got people interested, and that reinforced me, a lot of listeners, and that reinforced me to take them really seriously and make sure that I'm putting on a good show. One of the guys that I interviewed, Dr. Stanton Peele, was an addiction psychologist. He actually the things he wrote resonated with me about addiction, sure, but also about development. He wrote a book about kids. It was called Addiction Proof Your Kids. And in that book, it's like every single thing I believe to be true about the way to help a kid develop naturally on their own, but also to give them the right kind of help if they need it and not to overhelp them and not to helicopter parent or teach your kid. I agree with completely. And the psychological principles he described were so well said. So I had him on. We talked about this kind of a thing. He learned after the podcast, usually you have a guest like, oh, thanks for that. They might share it out or something. He kept in touch and was very interested in me and the questions I asked. So he and I got an email thread going. He would ask, hey, here's this article about addiction and development. What do you think about this? Oh, I think that's it. So we go back and forth, and he learned after that I'd been addicted, and that I kicked it on my own. And he's like, that's not so uncommon. Showed me some literature about that. That is interesting. So we went back and forth for, I mean, it was probably up to a year at the point that he said we should together. And so all of a sudden, out of seemingly nowhere, in my work. and that you have to believe is true in order to make the world go around. They don't like. Anyway, but yeah, I've received some pretty nasty emails. A few like "I'm going to kill you." I guess you call that a death threat, is a way to say that. Yeah, yeah. I mean, none of which I take. A lot of times it's like people from you could tell are typing with their like a single finger late at night. It's like 2 a.m. They'll get like "you fucking idiot," but it's all lowercase and fucking spelled wrong and things like that. Stanton wrote a lot of books, and some of his best-selling books were about AA and anti-AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, 12 Steps. And he would get like, I mean, phone call. This is before cell phones. Phone calls at his house, like, "Hey, hope you sleep. Hope you don't sleep tonight because I'll be there at 10 o'clock to kill you and your family." Things like that, and actual mail. People taking the time to write out letters, hundreds and hundreds, probably thousands of death threats, and calling them out and whatever. So I absorbed some of that. Yeah, I yeah, I don't. I mean, I don't. You can ask my wife. I don't ever just. I should probably take them less seriously than I do. Actually, to be honest, I'm pretending I have a cavalier attitude, but every time I get something like that, I stew on it and think about it and get upset about it. And it's only when I'm able to take the time to be a little more stoic and say, like, the people who take the time to write this and don't want an answer back from me, they're the lackeys, not me. And so just go on with your life, and they can't take you down. Like, I'll think about it that way, and then I'll kind of reset. But I actually, every time I'm a pretty sensitive guy. Every time I get something like that, it does hurt a little bit. But it also helps that I have serious emails that are well written, and letters and phone calls from people who say, "I've read this, and it has literally saved my life, or the life of my kid, or turned around everything that I think to be true." Um, and just thanking me, not wanting something else from me, just saying thank you. And it seems like it took not so much for those people, for me to help those people see things differently in a way that actually helps them, and that helps soften the blow of pushback. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, yeah, that's a great way to put it. I'm a helping kind of a person. I really do like to help, and I know that it's sort of every dimension of my life that I do in terms of helping people. It goes against common practice. So people do hire me because they think that I'm unlike other people in the sense that I can produce a positive outcome the way that others maybe can't. And also, every time that happens, I'm unlike other people in the sense that I argue with seem like I'm arguing with everything. So I'm like a disagreeable dick, and they don't like it. I can come across that way if people aren't really getting to know me. So I'm a little bit used to it. Oh, interesting. Interesting. Yes, absolutely. Well, okay, so there are a couple of answers to that. One is probably more true than the other one, but the other one sounds nicer. I started working with kids because my mother's a teacher. I was like, I was at risk of turning into a deadbeat if I didn't get a job, and she found a job for me at the YMCA after school at a YMCA after school program. Where he said, "Can you just like, you can go there. It's not that many hours, and you can go like play basketball with some kids, and then you get paid for it. Could you do that?" So I went there, and even when I started there, I didn't realize this, but I gravitated toward a whole table of kids and played basketball, played games with them, got to know them. And uh, the person who directed the program approached me and was saying, those kids are really tough to get along with and to deal with, and people have a lot of trouble have saying any words, getting to say anything back to them that isn't either throwing or swearing at them. And you seem to have a really way about you. So very early on in my working with kids, which started as like, can't you just do any job? It was reinforced positively. And as it was reinforced positively, I got to thinking about why would I. Well, first I thought, am I just pulling a fast one, like an imposter syndrome? Maybe I'm not actually very good with kids. They just think for some reason that I am. This is an accident. But then I got to thinking, like, I was that kid when I was growing up. I think I'm a pretty smart guy, smart enough to smart enough for jazz, to get along in conversations. And I have theories and I have thoughts that are important. And I was those were never acknowledged when I was in grade school, middle school, high school. I was just sort of it seemed like a guy who didn't want to go along with things, and constantly being told, you seem like you're bright, why don't you try at anything? And little did everyone know I was trying my damn hardest. I was probably trying twice as much as other people around me. It just couldn't get interested in the format of school. And so, but no one would have known that, and I didn't know how to communicate that. So something that I love about working with kids is that, especially the younger that I can work with them, but I like working with kids at any age, I can help them figure out how to communicate, and everybody how to communicate. There's parents involved when there's a kid that's having trouble in school. There are, of course, school staff involved, and there are kids involved. And kids have a lot to say, and they're often spoken for, and often they're spoken for incorrectly. And that'll keep happening because kids generally aren't as articulate as adults are, and they don't have as much sway with other adults as adults do. So I enjoy helping kids figure out what it is they need and want to say, and so they can communicate it so that they don't go down the same route for as long as I did. So I think that I have a special place in my heart for helping young developing people so that they can sort of catch whatever their difficulty is early on, and they don't have to go down a similar path as me or other people who had it worse than me. I think so. Yeah, de facto, but I think it's true. Thank you. Uh, sure, sure, sure. Well, I had teachers of music all the way through when I started playing until still now, but they're not teachers in the way that you normally think about them. They're usually people who I think I mentioned this style before, but usually people who put enough interesting things that had to do with music in front of me to chase that I could explore on my own and find them. And then they figure out where I was and say, well, why don't you do this and that? But as far as like straight up music lessons went, I attended lessons and didn't do well. It's like, read this. Here's how you read this music. Okay, good job. Here's how you read more music. And I would get bored with that. And along the way, they would say, read this music. And I would notice, I think the way I put it to you is there were little things that I found, little ways I found I could cheat. Cheat meaning just make it easier for myself to open up more bandwidth to learn new things. And I would ask my teacher about that. Like, I think the way I described it to you, people could probably understand, even if they don't know music. You play a C chord. They're playing three notes at a time, and they make a nice melodic major chord. And those notes are C, E, and G. And when I'm playing on the piano, you find those three notes, and they're right in a line. But then I noticed that there are different ways you can play those notes. Like you could play G, E, and C, maybe in different formats or different notes, but they're all the same fundamentally notes. And so I would ask my music teacher, hey, can't I just play it this way? That way I can kind of move around with this hand or have more space, or it'd be easier to get to the next chord. And his answer was, even though now I know that that's what you're eventually taught to do, the teacher was like, no, 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 that's not. Just stick to the 1 and 3 and the 5 because that's like for experts. People who are really good at music do that, but for now, you just do it this way. All of that to say, anytime I found a path to explore, it was sort of blocked. Like I had music lessons meant for me meant do it this way, and if you stick on track, you can eventually get good enough. And for me, learning music and learning everything was like, you have to give me a little room. I need to respect that people know what they're talking about, that for my part, but also if I'm going to do the thing the best I could possibly do it, I need a little room to explore and figure things out on my own, and then come back and ask questions about, don't you think this works? So as I grew, I just sort of taught myself, and I would triangulate with people or associate with people who were really good at music. There was a music teacher in my school that I did who wound up working with me, taught me drums actually, and didn't mind getting as creative as I wanted to. So that was pretty cool. And we play sort of on the side. And anyway, I taught myself how to play piano and sing just by I'd play by ear, listen to songs, and think, I wonder if I could play that. And then I would play these songs that I heard and think, I wonder if I could play that, and then also do it my own way. Like, is there another way that I could do it better? I taught myself how to sing, and that way, and yeah, eventually started writing my own songs because there was a little poetry dynamic and catharsis built into it. And now I'm a professional musician, and it's difficult to tell me apart unless you put a score of music in front of me and another professional player and say, okay, read this. Okay, I might look silly, but hey, play your best stuff and put me alongside with another person saying it's a professional. It's hard to tell the difference. So to me, it's just like music is playing stuff that's good, that people think sounds good. And to other musicians, sometimes music means something more specific, like play something that sounds good, but there's a blueprint for that, and you have to follow it. Mm. I think that's a tough question because, in many respects, yes. But if the schools themselves, I don't know if they have the capacity or if they're allowed to, like in a liability sense, do all that they know would be good sense in terms of teaching kids, and more specifically, educators themselves, who are incredible educators, who really know what would really be best for a student in terms of learning one thing or another, and in the long run, certainly are bogged down by systems of the school, and rules and regulations that they have to follow to the extent that they can't actually do what they know would be best pedagogy. So no, because I didn't want to just say no. But I think that even schools who have the right idea and want to do the right things, they really have limitations about what they can do and how far they can stretch it and how much they can individualize their style of education each kid. And I see that kids, even if there's a school might be doing really well, I still see the same fundamental problems in the kids that seem to lag behind. And there's not a really good system of helping those kids figure out what it is they're lagging behind in, and whether is it like, do you really have a deficit, or do you have this way of learning that not everybody does, but if only that was fostered a little bit, you could actually, you could be the next Elon Musk or something like that. Sure. Yeah. I'm not sure what the quote is, but it sounds like something I would say. But sure, for sure. I think addiction stems from an inability to, reach on one's own joy in life for whatever reason, or at least an inability to believe that you have the capacity to reach joy in life. And I think that has a lot to do with, for instance, when I was teaching myself how to play the piano, that sounds nice and it sounds like, wow, what a gift. But things like that, even something trivial as learning music, I always felt that if I was going to explore it, it also meant simultaneously that I was doing the wrong thing and I was being bad. If I actually used own uh, my own best skills to learn something or to do something new, then it was always going against the grain and doing something bad, and there was no one that meant there was no one really to talk to about it. Um, so so that kind of an isolation of thought or socially, I think is easily leads to something like an addiction. Yeah, I can't see you right now. Oh, sorry. Sure. Anything you want. No, it's okay. No, this is like nothing compared to what I would anyway. Yeah, I mean, I have to put this is sort of the a keynote of the book. I mean, I have to take some personal responsibility here. So part of it is how I dealt with whatever adversity I was facing. But sure, I think that yes, I became addicted or I became involved in a relationship with something like a drug to make me feel well, in part because even when I felt like I was doing things that I did my best, like teaching myself how to play piano or teaching myself how to read and write in certain ways, I thought, this is how I do things. I never thought of it in terms of this is very creative. I have something to offer that other people don't. I felt that I was doing things in a weird, stupid way at best, and a bad, eh, uh, maladaptive kind of way that other people don't like at worst. So that made me feel somewhat isolated from that was the difference between me tinkering with stuff and ideas and and projects and actually becoming masterful at them. And I think that the mastery of things, including things like relationships and stuff like writing or working in the schools or playing music, mastery of those things are what make me connected enough and involved and productively with the world and people around me that creates an addiction antidote. That's like the antithesis of addiction. But not being able to do those things and actually feeling and believing that I didn't have what it takes to create mastery, to create connectiveness, purpose for myself. That's what led me to finding that kind of elation in drugs, and that's what got me to that belief system, which was self fulfilling, led me down a path where I didn't feel like I could do things for myself, but I did feel like the drug could at least do something for me that was predictable, that worked every time, and it got me close enough to that feeling, at least in the short term, that it would pass. And so eventually, that wasn't just like I would do a drug sometimes. It was like I really relied on that drug.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm trying to get you back on video. Let me see.
No problem.
And so,
I think totally, because you grow up and you form a story about yourself, and a great teacher or a great education system will help you form a story about yourself that leads to wanting to do well for yourself, and wanting to do well because your actions mean something to other people as well, and actually making you feel as though if you're ever hitting a roadblock, you have what it takes, whether it's through resources or through your own best effort, to change that and recover from a mistake and to turn it into something prosperous for yourself. That's a good education, I think. It's like you have what it takes to explore, learn what you need to do. You have the resources that it takes to do your best learning and best thinking. You can overcome mistakes. They might be obstacles, but in the end, it's good to have made mistakes and learn from them. Versus, we have a system of doing things. You can't seem to keep up with it. Maybe if you had a little extra help, you could keep up with us. You seem to be distracted doing, your own style of learning. You need to quit that for and pay attention in class, or so you can learn what we're doing. And then having this story about yourself that you're just always behind. You don't fit in with certain groups the correct quote unquote way, or having a story about yourself that it takes more than your own best effort and responsibility to be able to make well for yourself. And mistakes are actually not necessarily only things that are not, inconvenience versus tragedy. Mistakes can be totally tragic, and you need to avoid mistakes. That's that's sort of that's could be the difference between growing up with a propensity for addiction and not. It's the story that you tell about yourself and the story that other people tell for you. Like purposes of, if I were leading a training or something, people could buy it there. And it was on Amazon for a while, and I don't know what happened to that. It doesn't sell really anymore unless people ask me for it. It's still on. It's still there. So it's called The Child in Me. Oh, I have it right here. The Child in Me and Power of Mindfulness and Self Control. And that was about a child that taught me that there was an avenue toward mindfulness that did not involve meditation. And it was sort of a book about me telling on myself as an educator who always told other educators, you have to follow what this kid's interests are. And if you're a really great listener, you can follow what their interests are. And you don't have to say, yeah, just do whatever you want. You can say, look, there are some rules that you might want to follow, to be a go along kind of a citizen or a student in a school. And at the same time, these things you're interested in, there's a way to map them onto, the school structure. And this kid was telling me, talking about mindfulness, and we were both, and he said, I hate meditation. And I was trying to convince him that I hate it now, but it's good for you. And he came up with a plan about how to become more mindful sans meditation. There's no sitting down, counting. And it wound up being a theory that was almost exactly like this woman named Ellen Langer, who people called the mother of mindfulness. She's a psychologist from Harvard, written several best-selling books. Anyway, he just developed sort of like a stoic attitude. He's like, and my project for him was, all right, write a thing, and let's create a mindfulness like plan. And he did it, and didn't have anything to do with meditation. It wasn't incompatible with it, but it was a lot of like noticing, noticing things, new things actively, rather than trying to hold things stable all the time, or understanding the difference between mistakes as a catastrophe and mistakes as a way to learning, which wound up, this is before Carol Dweck wrote a book called Mindset, which is all about growth mindset. And basically that's what this student had figured out for himself, is that there's such a thing as growth mindset and it's better. So all these different precepts. And anyway, it was just a short book about that dialogue that I had with this kid. And I always found it was fascinating enough to me, the relationship. And this kid has grown to in the workplace, and he's an innovative guy now. And he was in middle school at the time. So just a short little blip about this interaction with a kid who thought much differently, so much differently that even I, almost didn't give him the platform that he needed. To be able to meet an entire group of people who thought similarly about our, what do you call it, situation in 2020 as I do, by Brett Weinstein. And luckily, I bet people listening to you don't need me to explain it, so I won't. But that was a cool pick me up, a great motivator for me in this time when things are a little confusing. But luckily for me, I work in an addiction program. Follows the same my work with kids, but it's for people who have addictive involvements with drugs or anything else, sex, pornography, food, and it's an online cognitive behavioral therapeutic program that was first devised by Dr. Stanton Peele, my co-author, and he turned it into a residential rehabilitation place. Harvard funded him to do it. It was pretty successful if the goal was remain abstinent from drugs. It was about 60% success rate, which doesn't sound great, but it's actually better than most rehabs. And he didn't like the idea of the goal being abstinence only. So he turned this into a program that he could do on his own, that the goal was set by the participant, and the goals could be fluid. Just let's walk down these tracks and talk about yourself in a way that maybe you usually don't. We can sort of target some of your best and worst thinking and figure out whatever. So anyway, I work in this program. I develop some of the content for it, and I also work as a counselor in the program. And it's all online. People can do Skype calls like we're doing now, and it's we can type back and forth. They do exercises and send them in. So a new book that I'm writing right now, that I'm working with Stanton to write, is a book about that program. So it's sort of like an ebook that we'll put out, and I think we'll do a hard copy on Amazon that has to do with the fundamentals of the program, so that maybe there are people who would benefit from the principles but don't necessarily want to pay for this, and spend all this time on an online program. They could buy the book and it would help them. So that's one that's coming out, and I'm writing another one right now that will hopefully find a home in a publisher's hands. I think I have a good way that I'm going to do that. But it's about school systems and more the K through 12 school systems, and it's sort of like knowing what I know. If only I could create a school system based on first principles thinking, what would it look like? What would education look like to me? And so I've been working on that since before 2020, and hopefully I'll have it done in some in my own life enough and worked out in ways that I wouldn't have expected enough that I think I remain optimistic when things are not working out generally, which they don't seem to be very well right now. In terms of whether Biden won in earnest, it seems I think he did. I think I think he won the election in terms of if the question is like was there voter fraud enough to overturn the election? I don't think that there was, but you know, oh no, but the forces that be probably has something to do with what got people interested in voting one way or another. But that goes so deep as to not being able to form a coherent belief around it. So I think I'll be quiet about that. I don't know. I think I'm optimistic about what will happen. I don't think that return to normal is necessarily a good thing. And I don't think that's inherently good because there was plenty that was happening in what we were probably calling normal that led to the debacles that we're in now. But I do think that we'll probably get, I think no matter who is in charge, we're probably going to be getting our pandemic under control. And I think that if you listen to, oh no, what's his name? Nicholas Christakis, the guy from, the guy that was, he was at Yale and he had that famous video with all the students screaming at him for being racist or something. He said people could wear whatever Halloween costumes they wanted to. He's also an epidemiologist, and he wrote a pretty cool book recently. I haven't read it. I've just heard him in an interview. And what he thinks about the pandemic seems pretty right on. Like we have cavalry kind of on the way. We're going to have better treatments over time. There's probably going to be some economic destruction, and hopefully we'll be able to hold stable. But there will be a vaccine, and that will help. We will reach something like herd immunity pretty soon in the next year or two, and probably 2 years, and that'll help. We probably won't get to right back into what we were doing right away, even if we have a herd immunity and pretty good ways to treat things. So his prediction is like late 2023, 2024. We've probably already been opening things back up as normal for a while, but people are we're still trying to like limit capacities and things like that. So he thinks like 2023, 2024, we're letting it rip again, and there's something akin to the Roaring Twenties that happens then, and that sounds probably right to me. It sounds like I would. It sounds right because I want that to happen sooner than later, and that sounds like too long for me, so it's probably true. But that's how I came to that belief. I admire a lot, who I was eager to get her the book when I wrote it, Outgrowing Addiction, because I learned a lot from her. Is a woman named Janine Fitzgerald, who's a national, international speaker, but she doesn't like fame kind of stuff. Like, she doesn't like the way that podcast conversations or like news conversations go, because she thinks that the questions would be devised in such a way that her best points wouldn't get across. So she just doesn't do the publicity. But she wrote a book called The Dance of Interaction, which is a really great book. And I get my point here. Sorry, is that she has opened schools that basically they're her first principles, and she runs them that way, and she's made them somehow very affordable, and they're all called the Fitzgerald Institute schools. She plans to open them in several states, and I could see myself doing something like that down the road, um, if I have what it takes. We'll see, but more or less, I just like getting the ideas out there and hope that some good entrepreneur or good educator will be able to do more than what I can. And that's the podcast that I host, and uh, on behalf of our life process program that I was talking about. So that's I host stories that we tell about people's addiction recovery that did not follow a traditional path every Sunday, and that's called Sundays with Stories. All of that's part of a LPP podcast. And I host another podcast when I can, when I'm given the opportunity to, called FSTP Presents, Families for Sensible Drug Policy Presents. And it's all about families who have gone through the same kinds of things with their kids that I did in my life. And they formed a coalition it's actually a George Soros sponsored. I would like to see that some later day. But anyway, they the Open Society Foundation, one of his foundations that, they're nonprofit. Anyway, they're really cool people who have really good ideas about what it means to raise human beings. And a lot of them are people who lost their own children to fatal drug use and addiction. So when I can, I have guests on there to talk about whatever their expertise is in that area. Those are my 3 podcasts. Addiction. Yeah, I'm on Facebook as well. Actually, I have a group called the Social Exchange on Facebook that has almost 1,000 members now who regularly engage in these kinds of conversations through Facebook. So I found a good use for Facebook. Yeah, people are welcome to join. Oh yeah, I mean, hey, what can I say? There's some of them that, that like 20/80 rule, or like I forget what that's called. I've had a couple guests on that are probably a good 80% of all those views on YouTube, but we'll hope we can get that momentum going. Thank you so much, Toby.